Alright guys, today we're going to be talking about the Tongass National Forest and specifically different management strategies employed in the forest and the roadless rule. So the Tongass National Forest is in southeast Alaska. It is the largest national forest in the United States. It is the largest intact temperate rainforest in the entire world, and around 75,000 Alaskans live within the boundaries of the forest. Home to a lot of trees, it's a huge carbon sink. Got old growth forests, young growth forests. It's absolutely gorgeous. Great water, great rivers, great lakes, great waterfalls. We have glaciers, and we have a lot of home for wildlife, bears, eagles, geese, caribou, fish, wolves. Absolutely gorgeous place, but it's a national forest, so we also have logging. National forests are managed by the Forest Service to be economically productive, and a lot of that entails cutting down trees and building roads to enable that. So the Forest Service is the only land management agency housed in the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Their mission is to care for the land and serve the people, and they manage forests for their health, their diversity, and their productivity. And they manage about 25% of the public land in the United States. So to manage these forests for their productivity, they typically contract out logging operations. So in the 1950s, you can see that this kind of really ramped up, and the Forest Service was harvesting a lot of timber, dropped off significantly in 1990. There were a lot of environmental and ethical concerns about how productive these contracts really were and what damage they were doing to the forests. But you can see that they did log a lot, and in order to log, they had to create roads. I have this quote I'm going to tell you or speak to you from Bill Bryson. He's the author of A Walk in the Woods, which was written in 1999. And he says, "The Forest Service is a truly extraordinary institution. A lot of people, seeing the word forest in the title, assume it has something to do with looking after trees. In fact, mostly what the Forest Service does is build roads. I am not kidding. There are 387,000 miles of roads in America's national forests. That may seem a meaningless figure, but look at it this way. It is 8 times the total mileage of America's interstate highway system. It is the largest road system in the world in control of a single body. The Forest Service has the second highest number of road engineers of any government institution on the planet. Show them a stand of trees anywhere, and they will regard it thoughtfully for a long while and say at last, you know, we could put a road here." So in response to that, the government kind of woke up, realized what they were doing, and in 2001, we got the roadless rule. Bill Clinton pushed this through the Forest Service in the last month of his presidency. It's kind of his parting gift to the environmental community. And it prohibited road construction on all roadless areas in national forests. That was about 58.8 million acres of Forest Service land. The purpose was to provide lasting protection to these areas. We identified them as being valuable for not having roads, so we protected them. Tongass was covered, 9.3 million acres are protected by the rule, and that was about 50% of the forest. Sounds great, right? This actually caused a lot of controversy. So the Bush administration hated the rule. They came in a month later and they refused to enforce it in court. And they also immediately exempted the Tongass National Forest from being covered by the rule. So what do we do in America? We just sue each other a bunch. There are hundreds of court cases about this. So all of these legal events, the main ones are on the left. I'm not going to go into it because it's really confusing. But on the right, you can see whether we had the roadless rule or not through all of these things, and it changed about 7 or 8 times. And then 12 years later, we ultimately ended up with what we had before. We do have the roadless rule. We are covered. So it was a really long, confusing process. But even though it was a big legal battle, you can see on the left that the predicted road building without the rule was going to be about 12,000 miles or 1,200 miles of road in national forests. What actually happened was less than 100 miles of road construction. And the key players in this for the roadless rule were the NRDC, Earth Justice, the Wilderness Society, those are some nonprofits, and the Obama administration after they got in started defending it. Against the rule, we had Wyoming, Alaska, Idaho. Those are the 3 states that were really, really, really against this rule. The timber industry and the Bush administration. But the ultimate authority lied in the court system. So Tongass kind of takes a different path. So immediately after the rule was written, Alaska sued the federal government. The Bush administration, who didn't want to defend the rule, exempted Tongass. They settled the case. And there are a lot of other court battles about this, but in 2007 is what I'm going to highlight. A court ordered that there needed to be a new forest management plan in the Tongass, and that is what triggers our first EIS. And then after that, we have even more court battles. Eventually, in 2015, Tongass is protected by the roadless rule. So, our first EIS is a 2008 Forest Management Plan. For context, Tongass was legally exempt from the roadless rule at this time, so they could build roads in the national forest. The proposed action was amending the old forest plan, which is from 1997. The purpose and need, this is literally from the EIS, it was court ordered. I don't think the Forest Service really thought that they needed to do an EIS or even amend the plan, but the court said that they had to. There are 7 alternatives considered. I'm going to highlight 2 of them, number 5 and number 6, because number 5 is the no action alternative. That was the 1997 plan. So they basically just kind of plugged in all these numbers. There would be 3.6 million acres available for harvesting, 260 million board feet of wood available for sale, and they're going to do some limited road construction. What they went with was alternative number 6. There were 3.5 million acres of forest available for harvesting and 267 million board feet of timber available for sale, and that also had limited road construction. Those 2 alternatives are almost identical, so you can kind of see that the Forest Service did not want to change the 1997 plan, but they knew that they had to do something different because the court ordered it. This is a programmatic EIS. 3 predominant considerations were to protect roadless areas from development, permit logging for economic sustainability, and protect wildlife habitat. The impacts that were considered: climate and air, soil and plants, water and wetlands, wildlife and biodiversity, human land uses, and economic development and efficiency. I could not find an EPA rating for this EIS. So our take on this, we don't really think the Forest Service heart was in it. The selected action and the no action were pretty much identical, like I said. All of these alternatives, I'm going to go back to the last slide, basically we're just plugging and chugging different numbers in. It wasn't a very dynamic EIS. They had to amend the plan, and there was such a high degree of legal uncertainty that I'm not sure the Forest Service really wanted to do anything drastic, because why go through the entire process, change what you're doing, and then a year later, court case comes in and invalidates it. And I think the Bush administration liked the old management plans and did not want to change them very much. So if you think about this as a system, we kind of have the forest environment, the sustainable use aspect of using that forest sustainably, and we also have the local economy. This decision probably weighed the needs of the local economy a little more than the environmental or sustainability dynamics of it. So our second EIS is from 2016. Context for this: Tongass is covered by the roadless rule. The proposed action was amending the 2008 Forest Management Plan, and purpose and need, it wasn't court ordered. This was coming from the top of the Forest Service. First, they wanted to conform management plans to being covered by the roadless rule, or vice versa, or they wanted to and they also wanted to transition from old growth harvesting to young growth harvesting. They also set a new demand standard for allowable sale quantity of timber from the forest, and it was a pretty drastic difference. It was 46 million board feet, not 267. So all of these alternatives get us to these management goals, and they're all pretty different. So 5 alternatives were discussed for this EIS. A lot of them had to do with actually rulemaking to repeal the roadless rule to harvest more timber in roadless areas, but eventually they went with the 5th alternative, which was to implement the roadless rule, only harvest in areas that have been designated as suitable for timber production, and they were going to switch from old growth harvesting to young growth harvesting by going into old growth areas, but only harvesting secondary growth trees. Again, this is a programmatic EIS. The considerations for this one were a little different. First, it's the young growth transition. Second, they wanted to promote renewable energy development in the southeastern Alaska area. Third, to evaluate roadless areas, not necessarily protect them, but evaluate them to see if we needed to create roads there. And fourth, same as the last one, to protect wildlife habitat. And they considered the same exact impacts as they did in the 2008 one. The EPA rated this EC2, which meant environmental concerns with some insufficient information. And what they were specifically looking for is they wanted them to talk more about the climate impacts of harvesting timber in the Tongass. It's the largest temperate rainforest in the entire world. So taking those carbon fixing trees out of there is going to have some climate impacts. And the EPA wanted the Forest Service to discuss that a little more. Our take on this, it was a much more dynamic EIS than the 2008 one. The alternatives were very different in what they were trying to accomplish. Um, and I think that was because this was an agency initiated EIS and not court ordered. So when the agency probably they wanted to do this. In 2008 they didn't want to. They were told they had to by the court. And you can kind of see the clear management priorities of moving from young growth transition, promoting energy, and evaluating these roadless areas. It's not just a plug and chug alternative thing like 2008 was. They've kind of put some thought into this. So going back to our systems, I think in this decision we kind of weighed more on the sustainability side over the economic needs and the environmental concerns. The entire thing was transitioning from old growth to young growth in order to promote sustainable use of that forest product. So just some final takeaways. Federal agencies operate in a really tough situation. The legal complexity of the policy process is insane. The Forest Service every single year did not know whether they had to comply with this rule or not, so how are they going to make efficient management plans in that kind of uncertainty? You can also see that it's hard for them because when administrations change, priorities change, they have different ideas of what they need to do. Tongass is roadless. That's a big takeaway. Clear differences in the EISs due mostly to agency leadership. And there are a lot of competing interests in this. You have to balance the needs of the economy, the needs of the Forest Service to be able to extract resources from this forest going into the future. And you need to ultimately consider the environment of the forest and of the world because everything's related. And all right, leave you with this nice picture of a bear in a tree.